Welcome to episode number 3 of the Modern Mindset Podcast. I'm your host, Mahfouz Chaudhry. I'm here with my incredible co-host, Camille, and we are on episode 3. Episode 3 is kind of a big deal. I think statistically in the podcast world, strangely enough, it's somewhere between episode number 3 and 4 that you start seeing podcast show fall apart. And I think that in many ways will tie in with our topic of the day because it's fascinating for me to spend a little bit of time thinking about what is the difference between someone who drops 3 seasons versus someone who drops 3 episodes. So Camille, thank you so much for joining me. It's worth pointing out the fact that we're starting later than usual for no other reason than my own responsibility. It's kind of ironic that we're talking about execution today, and I fell short on starting on time. So I am glad that we still could do it, but I'm glad that I am still running here from a 11 a.m. start today. So for those of you that are tuning in live, we greatly appreciate you being in here. But Camille, Mr. Punctual, the guy who was here on time, I want to thank you for being here. How's your day going so far?
It's going well, and I mean, also with better execution, there's going to be kindness aspect to it. Already, I'm messing up, so it looks like we needed that extra hour for me to wake up as well. So I don't blame you. It happens, and I haven't done much today besides working out, so I'm happy to get my day started.
Hey, that's incredible, man. And yeah, the kindness piece is definitely welcomed and greatly appreciated, but also worth noting that the perfection level that sometimes people try to iron out in their game plan that makes a difference between whether or not they're going to execute. Sometimes they use perfection as a reason of why they don't take action. And this failure for me to start early, as much as I'm going to do a great case in justifying why, at the end of the day, it's still going to be an excuse. But the important thing is we still got back on the horse. It's kind of like you showed up to the gym late, but you still did the workout. Although you don't want to make that a habit, although you don't want to start making it okay to be unpredictable every single time you show up, you want to still create a bit of a routine. It's also worth noting that action is better than perfection. And sometimes the action will not be perfect, but it'll still allow you to achieve the same results or somewhere close to the results and far more than it would have if you didn't end up taking action in the first place. We talked about the podcast and how a lot of people fall short after episode 3 or 4. I think what sometimes gets left out in the conversation is the lack of emphasis on the unsexy parts of action. Right, the unsexy parts is sustainability. Like, can we do it for a long period of time? Do I have a system in place that allows me to do it for a long period of time? And we started to see the show off talking about, it's great to have great conversations. It's great to have great experiences. But although a lot of those things are being fostered internally, what I'm excited to talk about today is how do you convert that from what used to be an idea into now a sustainable action that you can do over and over again that doesn't just allow you to really enhance your way of thinking around an idea, but actually implement that in a way that changes your life. Because it's not only until you implement and take action on these ideas that we talked about that you're starting to see real change. What are your thoughts about that bridge, Camille? The bridge between an idea to action, and what you feel that the steps in those bridges consist of in order for someone to cross that bridge successfully.
There's that book that you and I keep referencing called Atomic Habits by James Clear. And I think he makes a good case for that. If you want to make a habit, you have to you have to make it like part of your identity, and ask yourself, uh, what does someone that does this habit like? What who are they? So if, for instance, is working out, you would ask yourself, what would an athlete do, right? And it would be they would exercise, and then you just had to break it down and take that huge, big idea into smaller chunks and figure out how to start and what are the steps you need to take to do so. And then along the way, you have to be able to be kind to yourself when you're going to fall short of them, because this is a new habit and this is a new frame of mind that you have to adopt. So naturally, you're going to make mistakes. And that's part of the process of learning failure and forgetting is normal and is actually necessary and does facilitate for better experience. And as long as you take it in that way, if you're negative about it, then it's almost, well, I wouldn't say it's impossible, but it's definitely not as productive as looking at it through an objective lens of, okay, this happened. How how can I manage my expectations for next time, and what do I have to do in order to better uh, gain, well, better learn from this? Because you can look at it through a negative way in the sense that you're not enough and you're a failure, or you're doing something wrong, and this is just a systematic pattern that you constantly repeat over and over across time in different dimensions. And of course, if you go that way, then what are you left with? Just nothing but an idea that you're never going to do anything right. So why bother at that point? So I think, in order to answer your question, because I kind of went off on a tangent there, that the first thing is, a lot of people don't realize emotions are actually necessary to take action. It's not the thought. In in certain experiments on the human mind, there have been people that have been injured in their insula, which is a very old part of the frontal cortex, and it is responsible for emotions. If you sever that, then you're constantly thinking about what you want to do or what you need to do, but you won't take action because you're just constantly thinking about what's the best way to do it. So you need to actually be able to tap into that emotion to begin that, and that's why motivation is necessary for reducing that activation energy. Now, keeping that in mind, if you're only solely focused on the emotion, you'll never take action. Because, or you may take action, but it won't be sustainable because then you constantly rely on that emotion. And so, in order to do that, you have to learn to be diligent and learn to focus and learn to concentrate. So, adopting a new habit does require you to actually take a good look at yourself and imagine, is this habit going to serve me well? And how can I implement it in my life? Is this part of of my identity that I want to adopt, or do I want to change? And what will I have to sacrifice in order to do so? I think those are good beginning steps to take a look at. And then, of course, we could go further down into the woods about how to actually implement these ideas. But I'm curious about your take on it as well.
I'm really glad we didn't start off this show with talking about execution first, because even as you're explaining what you just did, you really start seeing why understanding the better conversation, better experience mindset is important before you jump into the train of execution, because a lot of this stuff overlaps with what we talked about last week, right? Like last week we talked about the importance of not letting the word failure scare you away from new experiences, and not being able to really understand that if you don't actually experience enough, you don't have the skill sets to do more. And you can see how that plays out in action, because in the action is like a lot of people don't take that first step because they feel like they lack the skill sets, or they have that fear that they're not going to do well. And as a result of that, for some reason, the logic in our head makes sense that, hey, it's better not to do it at all than to try it. And maybe it won't go, even though logically we know the percentage of success is far more incremental on the action side than it is on the non-action side. But that's a big part of it. Is the motivation one is the most common thing. Motivation is the terminology that's probably used in the search engine more than anything else when you think about someone trying to get something done. And when you think about procrastination, that's often seen as the negative thing, right? It's like, I didn't get it done, and then the procrastination starts oozing out a lot of other emotions that sometimes results in you having negative self-talk. It starts making you think about the fact that you identify yourself as someone that's lazy. You identify yourself that's someone that's not driven. You identify yourself as you're built different, that there's certain people that deserve that level of success because they have something in them that you don't have. And all of a sudden you start putting yourself in this second tier league of people that maybe doesn't deserve the finer things in life. And I've seen that happen in many ways, and more often than not it happens more because of the upbringing of that individual. first and foremost, I think the parents are the first big influence on the way that you think about the world. From my background, I was raised to think in a very conservative and played safe mentality, right? My parents were more interested in the fascination of saving money and not taking risks. And in order for us to find security to live life comfortably, and those are words that I despise, right? All of those four words are terrifying words for me today. But that was the words I was raised under. And that was the words that I believe is the way to live for a very long time, because obviously my parents are my role models growing up. And you think whatever they're doing is the right decision because they've been doing that for your survival. So you go all in, eyes closed with that belief. And then all of a sudden, you may come out on the other side saying, why am I not getting the results that I want? Why are other people getting finer things in life? And am I doing something different? And I remember a long time ago when I was first starting my personal development journey, I remember there was an individual that I was a big fan of that once went up on stage and he spoke at a conference and he talked about what he used to do when he was broke. And although he may use the word broke loosely, it might be his terminology that he used to amplify the fact that he wasn't rich. He wasn't wealthy. Like broke might have not been like he was actually like living under the worst circumstance. But he talked about how every open house Sunday, he would drive out to those mansions and he would walk in these mansions of people that were selling them. And although he had no intention of buying them, he would walk in and he would say, listen, they're human beings just like me. They just figured out something that I haven't. If there are human beings that are living in these places, why can't I be one of them? And he would walk around, look around, and he would vision. In many ways, he would create this vision in his head that this was exactly the house that he wants to have one day. And the more he obsessed with that vision, the more he really understood it. He would even walk into watch stores at the Rolex shops in the mall, and he would put them on and look at himself in the mirror and envision and saying, hey, if some people out there in the world own this stuff, why can't I? Now, although his mentality came in with a very materialistic type motivation, he wanted the finer things in life, which I want to also point out that I'm not against getting finer things in life. I think there's more and better out there that's attainable by our ability as a human being. There's nothing wrong with wanting it, especially if you want it for the right reasons, right? Like I would want a nicer home to have bigger space, to be able to build out things like my creative studio and have like a nice infrastructure that I work for. I would love to have a car that runs nicer than mine. But at the same time, he found out what drove him, but he also had that realization over and over again that these things are being attained by other human beings, which means that he knew at those moments that there's certain things that he's missing that will allow him to maybe achieve that. And I'm very grateful to say that the man has been able to achieve that. Now, by the time he was up on stage, he already has achieved that. So he was spending more time explaining what he did, not the fact that, hey, I'm going to do it. But it was also a nice eye-opening experience for me, which is the idea of the fact that there are other people that are tapping into these things that actually exist in our landscape, right? These things that we want in life, whether it's materialistic or whether it's our capability of really having a better life and giving our family a better life, these opportunities are literally out there. Like today could be the day that I got in my car, I drove to the right destination, I spoke to the right person that was in that destination, and that person gets impacted in such a way that he or she will open the doors that will allow me to completely change my life forever. And if you really think about it in the micro scale, a lot of our opportunities that we've had and a lot of our successes came out of those micro things that we did. So what I become a fan of, as you talk about atomic habits, is I like thinking a lot about what those micro details are. And those micro details, first and foremost, ties in with the word experience that we talked about previously, is that the more you experience out there, the more you have collective data to make better decisions. And the more you start making better decisions, you'll notice that it has this substantial increase, I would say very exponential, in your capabilities of achieving better results. Over the last 5 years, one thing that I've been doing, Camille, without even realizing it, is I've been launching new initiatives every year. And I've been doing it without actually planning, like every year I'm going to launch something. Like I launched my podcast show 4 years ago. I launched my book 5 years ago. I'm launching a gratitude and productivity journal 2 months from now. I also launched many like consulting and speaking on stage and all these other initiatives that I've done in between. And I realized that it never occurred to me that this was actually a skill set. It just occurred to me that I have the physical capabilities to actually put something down on paper and make it a reality. And I feel like a lot of people don't realize they have that because they just haven't tasted it. And I'm excited about the fact that if they can taste it once and see that it's possible, they now know that this is very, very possible. And what's interesting is that we use the fitness analogy a lot. And the reason I think we use the fitness analogy is something that doesn't get talked about enough is the skills that you pick up from the gym of being really good at the gym actually allow you to use those skills in other areas of your life. Like it's very, very much transferable. First and foremost is the discipline, right? Like you go in and you make it happen regardless and shoot all the excuses down. Second one is consistency, right? You got to create a consistent schedule. Third is the system, the workouts that you're doing that allows you to get the most results. Those are very much skills that, if mastered in the battlegrounds of your gym, can be transferred into other areas of your life. And, as someone like yourself that far exceeds my level of execution, like I actually sometimes, I was even thinking about it in preparation of this episode earlier last week, Camille. I was thinking that, man, I have no idea if you're able to even explain how it is that you're so dedicated, like die hard dedicated in your execution in the gym. Because I have my routines and I go out there, but there is never once in my life that I even considered, like, I wonder if Camille's taking a day off today. I wonder if Camille's not on his workout today. I remember we used to even go out to cottages and you had this dedication of getting up early morning and going for your early morning walks without even someone putting it in motion. Like you just had so much level of dedication of getting it done that I never once questioned it. And more so, it inspired me to be dedicated in the way that I give action. Can you do the best that you can? And I'm gonna really help you do the best because I'm gonna keep asking follow-up questions because I want to understand this. Like I want to understand, are you built different? Like what happens in your mind that makes you so without like undeniably dedicated to your craft that you literally do it no matter what happens, and you've been doing it to such a level that I can't even keep up with. What got you there, and how are you able to make that as sustainable as possible?
Hmm. Yeah, I was actually thinking about that a lot too recently, so I guess good timing. Uh, Starts with the why. Why am I doing it? So, for me, why I exercise, there are so many different reasons. The ones that stick, though, is that I want it as part of my identity. I was in the military once upon a time, and I can't imagine myself not being fit for that reason because it's just not part of my identity. Although I did betray that sometimes, and I recognize how I felt when I did, and it wasn't a good feeling. As well as the fact that I'm in chronic pain, and I've had 2 hip surgeries since I was 21, which made me very conscious of the fact of how miserable it can be when you're deprived of basic human function, physical function. Like the fact that I used to be able to be like run for hours and for kilometers, and I was a very good endurance runner at once upon a time, to which I'm not anymore. And the difference between that really does kind of make me appreciate the fact that I probably won't reach that point anymore, or like anymore without a lot of dedication and with a lot of pain suppression, maybe. I don't know, because my joints can't handle jogging that much. So I still do it, but it hurts and it really does affect me in a negative way. So I have to be conscious of that and my limitations. But I still push. And the reason why is I also need to strengthen my body for that fact of my chronic pain. So because in the process of doing so, it hurts even more, but afterwards there are benefits. And also all the health benefits as well, a lot of people, they know this subconsciously, but it's really like your muscles secrete so many hormones that actually go to your brain, and they promote neurogenesis, synaptic density, dendritic branching. It's amazing what you can do. You can actually reprogram your brain through exercise. And also, it's been shown that it increases your creativity, and it increases your problem solving ability. Just exercise. So another aspect that really gets me to exercising is recognizing that it's an opportunity to grow every day. And I lose that opportunity if I don't take it. And every time I tell myself that I take a rest day, I feed uh, that feedback loop, and it becomes stronger. Oh, then I took a rest day that one time. Then it gets easier to hear that voice. Whereas, even I never feel like working out. I almost rarely feel like doing exercise, but I keep doing it to build that discipline for my identity, and also there's something that's very popular nowadays called epigenetics. And what that is basically your genes are inactivated, and you have to do certain like exposures to yourself, whether they're environmental with eating the right foods or exercising, for instance. But actually, there is some research I'm not too familiar with 100% yet, but also stressful situations activate genes in your body. And what that could mean is that by putting yourself through these stressors and putting yourself in these uncomfortable situations, you unlock more of yourself. And that is in line with my core value of self-improvement. And that is actually the main reason why I exercise. Is I want to unlock as much of myself as possible, to learn more about myself as possible, and I feel like I have an obligation to the world and to myself to become the person that I am meant to be and who I am. Even though I will never reach 100%, my goal in life is to be as close to that as possible. And even though I say it's an obligation, I do it out of respect for myself and for love, and also to share that with other people. So, exercise in particular, like that habit, has a lot of reasons attached to it. So it's kind of a difficult example because I've also had a unique experience in the fact that I was injured. I had hip surgeries at a young age, and I understand the difference between exercise and not exercising, and I've been deprived of it. So I understand how difficult it can be and how much of a privilege it is to actually exercise. There are people that can't. So, uh, to relate this to other people, it's about understanding why you do that and the identity you want to have. I want to have the identity of being more of myself, so activating those genes. I want to have the identity of being as intelligent as possible. So maybe the identity of, I don't know what, like a scientist or a doctor, right? So I want to have as much brain capacity as possible because that's what I need to help people. I want to adopt the identity of being a healthy person, and a healthy person does exercise, and it does extend health span and lifespan. And I want to have the identity, or at least I want to keep at least some of the identity of a soldier, because of all the values it has attached. That label really does serve me well. And what I have to sacrifice for that is time, energy, and I had to put other hobbies to the side. And also, I had to dedicate a lot of concentration to it. And something a lot of people, well, can relate to, but maybe not so much, is pain. Like, yeah, I had to put myself through uh, very excruciating pain sometimes. And I think that's what kind of separates a lot of people from actually following through on what they want to do, is that discomfort that you have to like push through, that flinch of, oh my god, I'm not good at this, can actually be pain, right? Like going through that uncomfortable process is painful. So overcoming that reaffirms that you are better than the challenge presented to you. And as long as you recognize that even trying is a success in itself, because you overcome that pain, is what can drive people forward to whatever habit they want to adapt.
It's so fun listening to you define your why to that much detail because I don't think anyone can really sit down and talk about their why in the extensiveness that you have. On a very surface level, it's very obvious to people that, hey, if they work out, they're going to get in better shape. They're going to have, they're going to look better. They're going to feel better. They're going to live longer potentially based on their physical activity. So the fact that people know that, it's interesting that that's not enough to get them off the couch sometimes. And what I think was really well highlighted here is the fact that you've spent a lot of time really defining your why in full detail, like really defining it. And the more you start defining it and making it as big and significant as it is, the more it's going to make the justification that it's worth getting up and going out and getting it done every single time, whether it's fitness or any other goal in your life. And I talk a lot about the burning desire. And, early in the years when I used to do a lot of my first personal development talks, I used to always create this illustration. And I think you were actually around for one of those first talks I've ever done many years ago. I remember like we almost exchanged hairstyles. You were bald with a beard back then, and I think I had a little bit of hair. So it was that long ago. And I remember the illustration that I had where I would do a fun activity with the group that was in the room, and I would simply show a very poor graphic that I drew of a stick figure that's crossing the building from one window to another about 30 feet up in the air with a small, tiny beam in the middle. And I would say, if I was to pay you $100, how many of you would walk this beam? And you would see a lot of nervous chuckles, and a few of those ambitious people would put their hand up either to be funny or maybe they're just good at gymnastics and they know it's easy. And they would raise their hand up and be like, I would do it. I would cross that building from one side to another on one beam because I am good at it. And I said, okay, let me raise the odds a little bit. What if I put the other building on fire? Would you still cross and go to the other building? And then you kind of see a few hands go down, a few more nervous chuckles. And there's always that one brave for some reason that really desperately needs that $100 that would risk their life for it. But then I would finish it off with phase three, which is I would say, think of someone that you love or something you love more than anything in this world. And let's say that was that one thing that was in that building. Forget the $100. Let's say I took it off the table. How many of you would cross in order to get to the other side and save the individual because that is the most important person to you in the world? And all the hands go up. And in fact, you almost hear the laughing completely just disappear because the realization at that moment is they visualized and pictured something so valuable to them that the path of least resistance was no longer the answer, right? In many ways, you've described your why in so much detail that the path of the least resistance, which is, hey, let me stay in today, take a day off, take a break, and stay in bed and watch a movie, no longer justifies it because something is burning in the building. Like whatever yours is burning away as a result of you not getting up. So you're going to get up as quick as you can and you're going to give it your best every single time you can. So I think it's so beautiful that the emphasis on really being very, very colorful and descriptive and really having a strong visual is absolutely important. And I think that part sometimes gets forgotten because when you get hit with a motivational speech, some people listen to our podcast shows and we've done some beautiful letters about how it motivated them. One thing that I always need to emphasize is that motivation doesn't last. In fact, it goes away very quickly. It can go away anywhere from 48 hours to 1 week on a really good spike. And once it's gone, if that was the only thing you relied on, now you have all the excuses in the world to give up. And it's very important to not let motivation be your only driver, but use the motivation as an initial indicator that your body wants more, right? And this comes down to very much the self-love component I highlight a lot, which is the idea that self-love isn't just about being happy for who you are today and what you have. I think that's important. Be grateful. Be grateful about where you are today in your life and even the smallest things that you have. The fact that you get to see the sun come up every day is as even an emphasis on something you should be grateful for. But then there's that other part, which is know that you deserve more. Like if you're that incredible and love yourself that much, you shouldn't be okay with being stagnant. You shouldn't be okay with not making progress. You should be so excited about the fact that someone that you love more than anything in the world can actually get more in life. How are you going to hold yourself back from that? You and I frequently bounce back and forth this quote that we love, which is the definition of hell being the version where you, of who you are in your current state, get to meet yourself at who you could have been at your full potential. And it terrifies me to think about how big that gap could be. The fact that there could be so much of a difference, that you could have been this most incredible human being in the world with all these things you've ever wanted in your life, and you live your life not being able to get that, and you get to see that at the very end. How heartbreaking it would be to see that if you just took action and really executed on the things that you believed in, you really could have gotten more. And I think that this is one thing that is such a big part of the action component. Is a lot of people think they need to make the right decision, but they don't realize that in this world you can make a decision first and then make it right. You don't have to shoot at the net. You might miss, but you can modify your technique and still score that goal. You don't have to hold yourself back because you didn't nail it in your first attempt. As a matter of fact, your second shot is usually even better than what could have been your first shot if you waited. And because that second shot would have allowed you to score the goal in a bit more of a strategic way that you didn't know how to do in the first attempt. And Atomic Habits, which I think would be the book of the month if we would throw a book out there, it does a very good job in talking about that test that they did with the ceramics group. And I bring this up quite often because the ceramics group had an exercise where they were divided into two groups, and each group was given one camera, and both of them were tasked with the project of going out there and taking 100 photographs. And the team number one was called Team Quantity, and the teacher didn't care about how good or how bad the photographs were. They were just tasked to get 100 photographs and bring it back. If they got 100, they get 100%. If they get 80 photographs, they get 80%, and so forth. They were simply graded on quantity. Then you have the second group that was called Team Quality. And they were graded on the fact that they would only be graded on one photo that they submit. They don't have to do 100 photos. They could do as many as they want or as little as they want. But that one photo that they submit will be the only grade that they get, and they'll be graded on quality. If it looks perfect, it'll be 100%. If it looks okay, it'll be graded 70, and so forth. So Team Quality and Team Quantity went off. When the project was finally over, it was very fascinating that they've highlighted that not only did Team Quantity do better in the grade that they got because of the fact that they were able to get 100 photos out, they also had far better quality photos than that one that came in from Team Quality. And when they further dug in, it made very much sense for why that was the case, that Team Quantity not only won the quantity battle, but they would have also won the quality battle. And it was simply because of the fact that when they were taking 100 photos, every step of the way, they were able to make progressive improvements. You know, after the first 10, they're like, hey, why don't we try a different lighting? After the next 10, they're like, why don't we try a different angle and different exposure? After the next 10, why don't we try different subjects and different colors? And then after the next 10, they'll be like, why don't we try different editing? So over time, their skill sets kept stacking on, that by the time that they got to 100, they had a couple dozen of photos that were far better than that one quality one. When they looked at what the one quality one was doing, they were spending all their time dictating how to make the perfect photo. They debated it. They never tested it. They just debated it. They made changes. They were worried that this wouldn't work. They doubted themselves. And then finally they shot one that they were all in agreement with. And when you think about what all in agreement with means, it doesn't mean perfection. It means you settled. You compromised and you accommodated. And that means in many ways, you didn't actually give your best attempt. So it was very surprising that it's not quantity over quality. It's not quality only. It's progressive quality. Is the fact that you're pushing stuff out there and you're only improving it over time. And I thought that exercise is something that is very interesting that lives in my brain because it can be implemented in anything you do. This podcast show, we're episode 3. I'm not worried about whether we drop 3 perfect podcasts. I'm interested in it. Can we get 1% better every time? And interestingly enough, every time you and I are about to record an episode, we take 5 or 10 minutes to talk about what happened last time, whether it was microphone volume, whether it was interruptions, whether it was video formatting. We very quickly chimed in and then we improved it. And just by doing that at the beginning of every episode, think about how good the show will be by the end of the tunnel. And all we're doing is giving ourselves a system that allows us to very quickly, as we said in the last episode, smell the flowers and decide, does it smell right or do we want to change something about it? And I love that we took that approach with our show. But I'm such a big fan of that progressive improvement that can happen with consistency as well.
Yeah, me too. Because, like you said, when you're paralyzed with perfection, then you don't take action. And if you don't take action, then you don't expose yourself to that experience. And that experience will teach you how to improve. And if you're ever lost or you plateau, then you can reevaluate what needs to be done. But you can't reach that plateau unless you try, right? Unless you pass that initial peak. Because naturally, you don't know what you're doing, at least for the first time. You may have some idea, but you can do all the research in the world, theoretically, and it doesn't come anywhere close to that practical experience. And myself included, a lot of people get paralyzed with the fact that I'm not doing it right. I don't know what I'm doing. This seems awkward and I don't know how to make it better. Or I don't know why I'm not doing as well as I imagine. And I think another piece that we're going to talk about a lot, and we always talk about, is managing expectations, right? If you go in with a certain expectation, even if it's a positive one or even if it's a negative one, you're living in the future. You're not living in the present moment, which is paramount when it comes to gaining as much experience as possible and creating those lessons to better have experiences, because the execution of even that improves over time just by naturally exposing yourself, right? Like any basketball player will tell you that, you can think about like the perfect shot. Like if you never played basketball, if you can think about the perfect shot, you can read about it, but are you better than that person that's shot like 100 times? Probably not. And that applies to many skills in life. It's just about starting and being kind, because if you're self-destructive with your criticism of yourself or your outcomes, then you're just harming yourself for no reason whatsoever.
Yeah.
That's another thing you were talking about as well with that guy that went to like rich people's mansions, right? He recognized that those people, those high achieving people, are human beings at the end of the day, and everyone knows human beings are flawed. So we're all flawed, but we're trying. And that's the most important thing, just to try. And if you don't know where to go, any path will take you there.
It's also interesting because this talks about um, the importance of remembering the end goal just as much as why you're doing it, right? If the end goal is I want to have a six-figure or a seven-figure a year business, you're not as much tied on one project. You're like, okay, this one didn't work. Let me find the next one. Okay, this one didn't work. Let me find the next one. Or this one kind of worked, but I can make it better. Because then you're not getting attached to that micro outcome, right? Because sometimes people are like, if this project doesn't work, I failed. It's not that, it's just one project. Just because a project failed doesn't mean you failed. It means you put that aside and you find the next thing. So when you know that bigger picture, what the long game looks like. For example, we're using fitness as an example. And if your end goal is like, I want to be 155 pounds with this much body fat percentage, it doesn't matter if one day you had the best workout, another day you didn't. One day you went for a walk, another day maybe you didn't have the perfect calorie deficit. It doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, you're asking yourself, like, am I still hitting my goal? No, I'm going to focus on that. You're not getting emotional about one workout. You're looking at how quickly or how slowly you're able to get the goal. And I got to tell you, like, how quickly versus how slowly, neither of them are bad. It's just you got to be okay with the plan that you put into motion. And this is, I'm bringing this up because it's also hard sometimes to talk about this, because when we say like, hey, it's about doing, not just reading, I also don't want to sell short that reading is a bad thing. Like, you shouldn't be reading. Like, there's a lot of value. Like, we talked about better conversations that you're learning from other people. I don't want this to seem like, oh, I shouldn't be talking, I should be walking, right? Like, walk the walk, not talk the talk. But like, there is a balance for both. There's benefits for both. And as a matter of fact, in many ways, the conversations and the experiences are fueling that skill set that you need to have better action. So you can't neglect it. And the question, I guess, that it comes down to then, Camille, is where's the balance? you read books, you talk about with me, you talk about a lot of things you learn and you share with me. I listen to a lot of audiobooks. I finish minimum one a week, and I'm still going at it very aggressively. And that's something I find that to be very valuable. Where do you find that balance? Like, at what point are you reading too much and not acting enough? Or what point are you acting too much and not learning enough from other people or other sources? Like, how do you describe what that balance is to make sure that you're still reaching your full efficiency day after day?
That yeah, that's a very difficult thing. Usually it's intuitive, and I'm not as methodical with that with most things. However, for instance, with exercise, if you just take the action and you like bench or deadlift and you don't realize what you're doing, you can really hurt yourself. So I guess with anything, look at the potential for harm first. What before you act, right? Because usually you know the potential for good. Once you know the potential for harm, think about how to avoid it. And if you don't know how, well, then that means you have to read more. And it becomes difficult for me to describe with a lot of things that I do because a lot of new experiences, I like to jump head first most of the time. But that being said, I went hang gliding, I went skydiving, right? Those were tandem. So I had an instructor, I had someone experienced. I basically attached them. So there's, even if I fail, it's up to them. And I think that's why I didn't read about it so much how to actually, open the parachute. I didn't read about those micro details because naturally I trusted that someone more experienced than me knows what they're doing. If I were to do something alone, for instance, like exercise, and trying out a new exercise, even to this day, I've been working out for 4 years, almost 5. If I try a new exercise, I read all about it first. And the way I go about it is what muscles does it target? Okay, what do I have to think about when I contract? And then I look at form checks. I watch 2 or 3 videos from different sources to understand the different points of view. If they're the same, that's usually a good sign. If they're different, well then I'm gonna have to try each of them to see which one best fits me without harming me. But at the same time, too, it has to make logical sense. And I'm at a point now where I'm no longer a beginner, so I have some sort of idea what can be harmful and what isn't. And that's where it gets difficult to define. Because for some people, that's too much. Although I would argue it isn't. For other people, they would say it's not enough. And you have to find that perfect balance. And that perfect balance is very hard to describe. And I think it's very individually placed. So as a general rule, I would say think about the harm that can come from doing what you're going to do. And then research how to avoid it. And once you feel satisfied with that research, double check. Because maybe it's just, for lack of a better term, your frustration with the fact that you had to learn about this. Because it is frustrating to be like, I want to just do it already. And I can't because I have to read about it. There's no excuse. You can harm yourself doing anything. So you're not going to like drive a car without knowing something about it first. You have potential to harm yourself and others. And I think that's where you draw the line between starting the action and to define how much when do you stop researching is a lot harder to say. It depends on
This
the personality type, I think. If you're an anxious
exactly.
person, then you're naturally going to research more or less too much.
Yeah,
And
it's definitely custom to the person, right? And I think that's worth highlighting. This also comes back to the statement of you don't have to make the right decision. You can make a decision and make it right. It's like once you try something out, if you're finding that you're having technical issues, use the basketball analogy. Is like first thing you want to do is maybe shoot a free throw. You just want to shoot the ball into the net. So in your version of how you approach it, you probably read up and watch a couple YouTube videos. You're like, okay, this is the form. This is how I need to hold the ball. This is how I need to follow through. And then they do it. And then they're like, you know what? I'm shooting about 2 out of 10. How do I shoot like 3 or 4 or 5 out of 10? Then they're gonna YouTube better techniques or better skill sets, better way of thinking, right? Like better training they can do outside of the basketball court that will make them better, better stamina that will let them do it for a longer period of time and get more practice in there. So the curiosity that comes out of that result, that in your example, the workout is like you were really happy that you were able to do it. You were able to have you were happy that you were able to do it without injuring yourself. But how do you do it better? And what are some nutritions that you can eat? And what are other workouts you can do to get yourself stronger so you can get better at that workout? So like that curiosity is never even linear. It's not always about how to get good at that one thing with that one technique. So if you think about that in this world, it's like if we use business as an example, it's like you're going to run a business. You're going to maybe look up how to start a business to get your foot in the ground. But then you're going to be like, oh, how do I generate sales for the business? How do I hire the right people? How do I train them? How do I be a good leader? How do I find the best next innovation? How do I find customers? And the books that you then pick up will be far different than the books that you thought you would pick up. You know, what you first thought would be an entrepreneurship 101 book may now become like a personal development mindset book, may become a wellness and health book because you're finding that you've been taking your health for granted as a result of putting all your emphasis on your business. And this comes down to what I get very excited about, which is laying out and being analytical about your 24 hours, right? And one thing that I've been a big fan of over the last 12 months is I've decided to start tracking what I do every single hour in order to like really get analytical about my productivity and my efficiency levels. And one of the applications that I decided to start using is an app called Toggle. That's Toggl. Now, Toggle is a timer app I believe was made for businesses. You know, a business would be able to know how much time they spend on training, how much time they've been able to spend on sales, how much time they've been able to spend on internal meetings and time wasters in order to really define like where they're wasting their time. I thought one day, like, hey, how cool would it be if I use that on my life to figure out where I'm wasting time as well? And I started timing everything. I would turn it on before I go to bed. I would turn it off when I wake up so I know how many hours I sleep. I would turn it on when I start working on the marketing agency side. I would turn it on when I start working on my own personal brand. I would turn it on when I'm even out on a relationship, on a date. I would turn that on. I would even turn it on when I'm driving because I want to know how much I'm driving. What's interesting after you have week over week results, Camille, is that you can start stacking them side by side. And you can say, like, hey, I feel really off this week. I feel really bad. I feel really weak. I feel really stressed. And I want to know why. And what's beautiful is that you're not just trusting your gut and your memory of like, oh, I think it's because I'm working too much. I think it's because I'm going out too much. I think it's because I'm not sleeping enough. But now you have real metrics that you can say, listen, week 4, I felt like the best I've ever had. Week 16, I feel like trash. What's the difference? And you'll actually be able to see like, hey, maybe you're not sleeping enough, or maybe you're sleeping too much. Maybe you're working too much, or maybe you're not working enough. Maybe you're not spending enough time in your relationship. So it's kind of nice that when we talk about being unique beings and that we all have different personalities and that bar of the measurements should be different for everyone, the first thing I think is self-discovery of what works for you. So when we talk about reading versus doing, it's like you got to first find your balance on how much you're able to do any given week versus how much you're able to study and learn. And sometimes you'll be able to see like, has that changed? Am I now putting too much time reading, or am I putting too much time executing? And you kind of find your common ground, and it's not 50-50. I need to emphasize that. It's not half my time was learning, half my time was doing. It's finding out what works for you. And I think every human being has the capability of doing that if they have measurements in place, which is a little unorthodox because, as you said, it's very intuitive and it's true. It should be more gut feeling than anything else, but there are real capabilities. And I kind of love that idea of time management, Camille, because you have a pillar for your work, you have a pillar for your relationship, you have a pillar for your wellness, your health, your mental stability, and maybe like journaling, maybe like doing meditation. Then you have like the other side of you that's like, are you getting enough sleep? Are you getting enough food? What's really fascinating to me is that if one goes up, you start winning in some areas of life. If the work part goes up, all of a sudden you may be like, hey, I'm earning more money. If the health side goes up, hey, I'm in better shape. So you could actually modify and decide by where you're putting your attention, you're able to amplify results. But we also know that because there's 24 hours, if you adjust something and increase the time spent there, you're probably losing time elsewhere. So I don't think you've done this physically on paper like I have, but I'm curious to learn a little bit about what your 24 hours or your week looks like. Are you able to break down whether it's percentage hours or like a good visualization? Because I'm very visual of like what your week looks like, and how do you decide what to increase and decrease on any given time to allow you to be the most efficient and really feel good about your week and not take anything for granted?
Yeah. So because I'm in this period of, like, let's say, self-discovery, I don't use any kind of like scheduling apps or time management apps for that reason. Of that, my emotions are pretty much not dependent on, but heavily influenced by the experience and learnings I get. So what I tend to do is I work out in the gym and like actually heavy lifting 5 times a week minimum. So what I do is based on what time I get up. I go to the gym Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays, Sundays. And sometimes that can be 5 a.m. because I wake up really early nowadays, or it can be as late. I think the latest is like 7 a.m. So it starts there. I go to the gym, I work out, and then the workout usually goes from 45 minutes to an hour long. And then I drive back home or I cycle back. And I can cycle to the gym and back. I usually don't cycle on Wednesdays and Saturdays because those are leg days, and goddamn does it hurt. So those 2 days are a little bit different. Mondays and Fridays, I just do a quick ab routine, and I also do some physio exercises, and I do physio stretches every day. So the first hour of my day is usually cook a pre-workout meal, take it, go to the gym. I come back, shower, then I usually do some sort of productive activity, whether it's studying. Some days, like since I had my huge exam yesterday, I'm taking a rest day today from studying, so no studying at all. But I usually do some sort of studying or do some sort of reading. Or in the case of today, I was just exploring different options of things I want to explore. So, I'm looking at doing paddleboarding today, and I've never done it before. So I was looking how to do that. I reserved the paddleboard for today. And I was looking at survival courses. So I'm going on, I forgot the day already, but I'm doing that next month. Or even next month, September 11th, that's it. So I know I'm looking at the options I want to improve myself. And that usually goes for maybe an hour or two. Then again, cook, eat, and depending on how I feel, whether my morning exercise was too intense or not intense, or like I recovered well from it, then I choose what meal to cook because that'll be my pre-workout meal for part two of my exercise, which is at home. And those exercises are usually like half an hour, 45 minutes most. So I exercise, I don't know, maybe 8 to 10 hours a week, not counting the physio exercise, not counting the physio stretches, because then I just intersperse that throughout the day wherever I can. So if I'm listening to music, sometimes to chill in between the study periods, sometimes I do Pomodoro Technique, which is you focus for half an hour to 45 minutes, and then you take a 5 to 10 minute break. If I do that, then I usually put on music, or if I can have the energy to listen to like a podcast that does stimulate me intellectually, I'll do that. And then I continue that until, let's say, I don't know, like 3 4 p.m., because that's when I cook dinner for the family. So like then I cook dinner for myself and my parents. We eat together, and then the afternoon is usually spent on either, depending on what my needs are. So if I have that exam, which I have another exam coming up, I'm going to be studying. If I am in a bad mood, maybe journaling for a bit. and or maybe even just playing guitar, maybe that, just to get myself out of my own head and to actually enjoy something like in my life, I guess, instead of just working all the time. Then I'm also learning Norwegian, so I'm spending anywhere from 10 minutes to maybe half an hour a day on that. And and from there, sometimes I will implement an activity with, I don't know, like going on a date, and then I adjust my day accordingly to that. But I spend, let's say, on average, an hour to an hour and a half exercising, then let's say 30 minutes to an hour doing physio stretches or exercises. And I also have twice a week I have to go to the physiotherapist, so that takes sometimes even 2 hours. And then there's driving, there's cycling, that takes time. There's cooking, that takes a lot of time, and eating as well. And what I do is more of an intuitive sense of what I need, but usually how it works is I have a system in place for exercise. So after meal one and after meal three, two or three. But also I have to recognize that we're all human, so I adjust accordingly. And in the night, usually I go to bed around 9, 10 p.m. now. If I can't sleep, then I'll read. And I won't be reading study material. Right now, I'm reading 12 books for, well, 12 Rules for Life, a book by Jordan Peterson, which I highly recommend. So I'm not, my goal isn't to finish it. My goal is to read it when I can and when I'm not overworking my brain. Because there is something to be said about doing too much intellectual activity and just burning out from that. So I'm not sure if I gave a good, accurate representation of that. But oh yeah, and throughout the week, I plan at least one event, usually on Saturdays, just to have something to look forward to, something to be excited
Yeah.
about.
Yes, yes. I'm so glad you also added that at the end. So there's a lot here, right? Like first and foremost, it's very clear to see that Camille has a very customized routine that matters to him, right? Like some people don't have that physio component, some people don't have the studying component, and but it's really like figuring out what priorities matter to you, what pillars matter to you the most, and then building and crafting a plan around those pillars, right? For some people, like financial standing might not be their ultimate priority right now. They may be doing very well financially, but they're like, yo, I'm very lonely. I'm very out of shape. I'm very unhappy. I feel like I'm still depressed. And that's a good indicator when you say about listening to your body is listening to what your body is craving and listen to how your body is feeling, because those days where you feel awful are one of the best wisdom you could possibly get. I remember when I used to have a career in pouring coffee for a living. You know, when I decided to really go heavy in this career, a lot of it was because life wasn't working out in my favor. Like I was getting bad grades at university. I got put on academic probation, and rather than like jumping up and rebuilding and becoming reborn like a phoenix, I said, you know what? I'm going to take the path of least resistance and stay with this job that I have pouring coffee for a living. And you know what? I'm going to do it so well that they're going to make me the manager and maybe give me a store to own one day. And I created ambitions around my excuses. And if you think about how often that happens, it's kind of scary. It's like you first form excuses, but then you're like, you know what? I'm going to do these excuses so well that it justifies me not dreaming bigger. And so I started working extra hard to get promoted in the coffee shop. I got these titles. I felt really good, and as much as it was working and I was getting the promotions and getting these minor salary raises every year, I still woke up every day feeling miserable. And that's the part I was ignoring for a very long time. I would get ready in the morning and my shift would start at 6 a.m. So I'm up like 4:35 a.m. and I'm looking myself in the mirror and I'm just like, man, I kind of want to just stay in bed and call in sick. I kind of want to just not let it happen. Or when you're at work, you're looking at the clock the entire time, praying that it ends, or you're trying to like make plans outside of your terrible routine to actually remind you that life is actually not as bad as you think. But it's kind of interesting is like those things, when you start listening to it, it's simply telling you that it's time for a change, that you need to assess something. And that's the part that I think often gets forgotten is that you got to once in a while stop your routines And it's scary because it's a routine. It's what you do every day consistently. You stop and take a step back and ask yourself, are the things that I'm doing every day serving that why that you and I spoke very heavily about at the very beginning of this podcast? Are they serving that goal that you had in life? And if they're not, maybe it's time to open and break it apart like a Jenga set before it tumbles over, and then rebuild it into something that maybe looks a little bit more like your plan. And your plan, it's interesting because what you highlighted was very important, because while I said like, hey, have one plan for driving, have one plan for relationship and finances, what you outlined really well is that it goes even deeper than that. Is like, have one that says try new things, right? Like have one that actually says like enjoy life or like rest, and like all these other parts that goes even micro. Like give yourself the freedom to do more. Give yourself that like recreational. We talk about escapism, I think, on episode 1. Is like, if escapism is something you enjoy, have that in your plan too. Like don't think that's anti-productive because it's not in your plan. What you pay attention to is what grows. What you need to decide is, are you growing the things that serves the why that you have at the very beginning? And if not, again, it's not the end of the world. Now you know, now you listen to your body, and now you make modifications as a result of that so that you could do something very, very different. But here's the most important part is, once you've outlined that plan, you know, this much percentage of my time here, this much percentage trying new things, even this minor percentage of enjoying life and allowing myself to have some rest. Once you have that plan, you got to commit to that plan. That's where the serendipity and fun and excitement goes out the window. Is you have to commit to the plan, and more importantly, you have to give that plan enough time to breathe before you wait the white flag and say it's not working, and then all of a sudden you reconfigure it. The problem also is on the other extreme, which is reconfiguring your plan too often because maybe you didn't get the results as quickly as you thought. Maybe you doubted yourself too quickly and you didn't actually see if the plan would work. You have to give it enough time to breathe. And for some people, that's 90 days. Some people, that's for a year. You have to be able to reconfigure it based on what you think gives it enough time to execute. But whatever that is you set on day one, if you're on day one, I'm going to do this plan for 90 days straight. You got to commit to that plan, and you got to commit to it right. I've talked to Camille about this recently. And as a matter of fact, this conversation happened while I was on a treadmill beside you, is the idea of self-sabotage. Right. And the idea of self-sabotage is something that happens to every one of us. Is in the middle of our plan, that voice that comes up and says, hey, you know what? Maybe do it 90% today and work extra hard next time. You know what? You're not feeling your best today. You're a little bit tired. For example, I had the self-sabotage voice this morning where it said, you know what? You had a long night yesterday. Maybe call Camille and reschedule it, or say, let's do it on another day instead. That is something that we see human beings experience every day. And for those of you that are listening, that is probably something you're thinking about right now, where that voice comes on and tells you and negotiates with you. You know, the one that negotiates and tells you like, hey, take a break today, take it easy. You know, maybe come back harder next time. You're a human being, relax. And although sometimes the relaxed part is giving you wisdom, what's note emphasizing is that when you come in with a plan, you got to surrender and execute that plan. No, you got to shut that self-negotiator off and say, you know what? Before I walked in, I said, these are the 5 things I'm doing today. I'm going to get it done because that's what I created. That's the plan that I put in motion. No one told me that. I made that plan, so I got to commit. And it was funny because when Camille and I met up at the gym, like we were warming up at the treadmill, and before he barely got comfortable, I was like, hey man, I'm skipping squats today. Like I didn't even ask him. I didn't even debate it with him. I was like, I'm skipping squats today. And my excuse, although wasn't a lie, I said, yesterday I went on a long hike, and as a result of that, my legs are on fire. So I'm going to rest my legs today. And, you know, Camille knows that I'm pretty bullish on getting things done and not excuses. So he kind of like allowed it. He didn't question it. And I was walking for a little bit, and I was thinking in my head, and my mind kind of drifted to a podcast episode that I saw late Kobe Bryant do with one of my favorite podcast hosts, Lewis House. And he was sitting in this podcast, and he was talking about how this is one of the biggest mistakes that athletes do that determine whether or not they're going to be the greatest in their field or not. And although he used the word athletes, it just made me think about everything else in every industry. Is the difference between being excellent and mediocre is sometimes allowing that self-negotiator to talk you out of your plan. He says, if you're going to show up at the gym, it doesn't matter if your knees start hurting a little bit, or all of a sudden you're feeling a little bit more exhausted than the day before, if you committed that these are the hours you're going to work out and these are the workouts that you're going to do, these are the tasks that you're going to take off your task list, you need to follow through with it because that's what you subscribe to. And after I was thinking about that, I slapped the stop button on my treadmill and I told Camille about that episode. And I said, I'm gonna go do my damn squats. And I went ahead and did it. And as a matter of fact, I went even harder while remembering that that was the plan. And like I was ashamed that I almost let the self-negotiator talk me out of it. So the voice in your head will sometimes remind you that there is a path with less resistance, and it's going to remind you that you could take it, and it's going to try to convince you that you'll still survive even though you know logically that you're going to probably fall behind or fall off track, or not be able to maintain the momentum towards your goal. Uh, you somehow surrender to that self negotiator that talks you out of things. I think what you meant when you talked about the emotional versus logical side is kind of in that realm, if I'm not mistaken, Camille, is that emotional part that is telling you one story, the logical part is telling you another story, and you're kind of torn between deciding how to follow suit. Is that aligned in any way with what you were saying about the emotional component, and how do you combat that? Because you mentioned like you know what you need to do, you know that these are the things that you need to do, and sometimes other priorities get in your way. Like, how do you combat that voice that maybe allows you to take it easy or change your priorities, even if it makes a good case?
Well, yeah, that's a difficult one. I think for me, what I find helps the most is recognizing if it's so easy to surrender to that voice now and you listen to it, the next time it's going to be louder. Like you said, anything you put your attention to grows. And just recognizing that means that I'm willing to trade my present for my future because I know that my why, and to attain that why, I want as least resistance as possible. So this is me being lazy, actually. Like just reframing it like that is enough for me a lot of the times. And of course, there has to be a healthy balance too. However, at those moments when you recognize that voice, and some people would even say like that's the devil, or that's evil creeping up on you, or that's sin. I think the recognizing that that's you trading the future for your present. And in every religion, in every society, we reward people that practice delayed gratification, that sacrifice the present for the future. And ultimately, we're trying to reach a better future anyway. And there is something to be said about living in the moment and experiencing as much as you can and enjoying it. But for a lot of things that apply to your why, is it in line with it? Is the best question to ask yourself. So when you hear that voice, instantly, I would say, what is the voice saying? The voice is saying, go easier. Why? Because you're afraid to be injured? Maybe then it's a logical thing to listen to. Or is it saying you should go easier because you don't want to put as much effort in? Then ask yourself, is that in line with the person I want to be? And most of the time it isn't. Well, at least I hope it isn't, because then what's the point of having that why in the first place? So I think just even asking yourself that, and then doing that reframing of that voice as to me overcoming that voice is actually me being lazy, and I prefer to be lazy, so why not combat the voice now so then future me doesn't have to deal with it as hard. Instead of having that voice become a scream, it becomes a whisper. So that's why with exercise and me, like, I can wake up some days and be like, oh my god, I'm sore. Yesterday, actually on Friday, yesterday, I had the exam for 7 hours. So I wasn't able to do my morning exercise, and I delayed it for after the exam. But on Friday, in order to make myself sleep better, I woke up at 4:30. I went on a 20-kilometer bike ride. I purposely exhausted myself doing like really random things. Like I even did like yoga for the first time in like 10 years. And that was hard. And I had every excuse, and I could have that voice tell me that, oh, you went so hard on Friday, you should take it easy on your legs. But actually, I pushed myself even harder and I hit a PR in squats. And the reason why is because I remembered why I'm doing what I'm doing and who I want to become. And that voice that initially gives me excuses is just background noise to me now, because I've actually learned how to tame it and manage it over time. And some days, yeah, it's louder, some days it's not. But over time, if you implement those steps and overcome it, you decrease that positive feedback loop. And then that makes you increase your positive feedback loop into the person you want to become. So I think those are effective strategies.
There's such a powerful thing in understanding that you can control the volume of that voice, right? When you realize that every single one of you, whether it's you or me, Camille, or anyone that's listening to this podcast, you can control that voice by how you navigate through those conversations, by giving in to that statement of where you give your attention grows. Is if you gave it the attention it wanted, it's now going to say, hey, if you listened before, there's a very likelihood that they're going to listen again. So let me come out, and let me even come out louder, because if they don't cave and bow down to my wisdom of what the easiest way out is, then maybe they just didn't hear me, so I got to be louder this time. On the other side, it's like, oh, it didn't hear me the first time or the second time, it's probably not going to hear me now. And then you kind of have this narrative in your head that there's a bit of pride that you're capable of going beyond what's possible. And when you prove that I didn't listen to self negotiator, I did the opposite and I got better results that are aligned with my why are you ever going to go back? Right? Why are you now going to say, like, hey, maybe I should listen the next time? It gives you that best feeling. And I think about the fact that I've never left a workout regretting the fact that I went to the gym. I never left a good meeting regretting the fact that I made a long drive to the meeting. I never left a good date regretting that I made the drive or paid the money to go out on a date or dress well. The fact that you get that indicator, while we're talking about emotions of things that make you feel bad, I want to emphasize the things that make you feel good is that that your body is saying you make the right decision because of the way that you feel leaving those environments. And once you start realizing that that's the case, you can listen very much to whether or not your body is suggesting you did the right thing or not. And it's kind of exciting when you think about that, right? It's like when people talk about intuition, gut feeling, some people talk about third eye, which is being guided by another set of your vision that you're not able to see very clearly. It excites me to think that there are ways that you're already knowing where you're supposed to be headed. And it's not to say that it's fate. There's a debate about that. Like, do you have a choice? But it knows, like, every single person has different things that presses their buttons and makes them feel good and excites them, and different desires and different ambition. When your body is responding to those things in a positive or negative way, it's a very quick realization that it's supposed to happen or not supposed to happen. And I don't want discomfort to be misunderstood either, because when you feel discomfort, sometimes you get that illusion of, okay, this isn't a good feeling, I shouldn't do this anymore. But you put it best when you talk about the bargain that happens between the present and the future, right? The discomfort, although it doesn't feel good, similar to lifting a heavy weight that may not feel good at the moment of lifting that heavy weight, in the future that you're going to get that benefit of getting stronger, or, that discomfort that may result in you having better social skills, that discomfort of you having a better opportunity because you maybe approach 10 people for an opportunity to partner up. There's a higher likelihood that you're going to have a partner. So that discomfort at the short term is also an indicator that there's potential for long-term benefits. And that's also worth listening to, although sometimes it gets misconstrued as this is a bad feeling and I shouldn't do it. So there is that mid-level conversation that's important to identify. Like, what is it that I'm feeling and why am I feeling it? Am I feeling it because I'm not used to this? And why am I feeling it is because I need to get better at it, therefore I'm going to keep doing it. And when you start paying attention and dissecting those emotions down, I think it guides you down the right path that I think makes it very, very important. I want to step away from fitness a little bit because we use fitness analogies a lot here. And I think that's going to work really well for someone that wants to make fitness a priority, and hopefully very well for those who are good at comparing those analogies with their life. But I want to talk about other areas that are also where these type of things apply. One of them being my podcast show that I started 4 years ago called Ride With Me. I started that podcast show 2 years later than I was supposed to. And I kept making excuses for why I shouldn't start that podcast show. One being that I didn't have the right equipment. One being that I didn't have a studio. One being that I didn't have a structure. A lot of people out here were getting in a studio with a guest, jamming for an hour straight, high quality production. They have an editor that puts it out. They do all the marketing and graphic design. And I didn't have any of that. And I kept making excuses. And one day I went to see a friend in New York City, and I had a really good conversation with them. You and I both know this friend very well. Our good friend Miles, shout out to him, that lives down in New Jersey. So we went down to go see him there. And on my way back from when I got to New York City and I was flying back, I was thinking back about great conversations that I had with our friend Miles. And I didn't have any Wi-Fi up in that jet. So for any millennials, you can relate to the stress of not having internet. It's like, what do you do with your life when you don't have Wi-Fi? So I was sitting there, and my mind does what it does best, is it drifts and it reflects and it brings back ideas. And you hope that over the years of taking your mind into this mental gym, that the ideas it brings back are actually healthy for you. And the idea that it brought back was the fact that I needed to stop making excuses and just do podcasting, because the alternative is not having a podcast show, period. So it was like, either have a podcast show that's not great, or don't have a podcast show, period. And by the time the plane landed, it was an hour and a half flight. And I landed and I came out of that flight and I said, I don't care what's going to happen. Tomorrow, I'm going to record my first podcast episode and I'm going to put it out there. And because I didn't have the practicality figured out, I started doing some things that are very, very unorthodox. Like I started not relying on inexpensive equipment or studio. I instead used the voice recorder app on my phone. I mounted the phone on my car. And as I'm driving around, I would hit record on my phone and I would just pour my thoughts in without a guest. So everything you can expect a podcast show to have, I didn't have. And every podcast host back then would very much identify that I'm doing it incorrectly. I have loud noises. I have the heater blaring because it was after Christmas. Like I had all these things happening, and you could hear those through the not so great quality on my audio recorder. And interestingly enough, I was able to hammer out over 100 episodes for season 1. And it ended up being one of the most listened to podcast shows by the millennial generation that year, specifically because people loved the unique rawness of that approach. The fact that it sounded like they were sitting in the passenger seat of my car and I was just speaking to them, rather than an expensive podcast equipment where, believe it or not, people would complain that it sounded too crisp when I went into one of those higher end studios for an episode. So it's the idea that the excuses of how things are done sometimes stops us from doing it because we don't think we're capable of getting there. Over the years, my podcast got better. It got better equipment, better execution, better marketing, better processes. But it started somewhere. And that somewhere is my opportunity to enter a new world and put everything out there and try things out and make those mistakes that you're supposed to make, and make modifications and build yourself into something great. My speaking career was the same thing. When I got on stage, I didn't quite know how I wanted to approach it, but by doing it the first time, by having all these nervous tics exposed, I was able to study and analyze myself and make adjustments and get better on stage. These are things that I don't care what industry you're in. I don't care what initiative that you're doing. These are reoccurring skills that can be done. What I like putting in place, Camille, and I'm interested to get your thoughts, because when we think about long game, right, it's a lifetime journey. A lot of the things that we put into motion sometimes take years, if not decades, to really see the fruition and benefits for it. We know motivation comes and goes. One thing that I get very excited about is setting up short-term wins in this long-term marathon. And these short-term wins are things that I can sprint to. So I sprint, I win. I sprint, I win. I sprint, I win, not realizing it, but I'm getting closer to my long-term win. And I hate to come back to fitness analogies, but I really think it makes the best illustration. So we got to sometimes come back to this because it's true. I really do this in my life. I specifically pick an upcoming short-term goal that's coming up in order to make myself work out at my best, even though my end goal is not that goal. Is my end goal gets it benefits because of it. So for example, when in the summer we usually have our cottage trip, and I tell myself, like, work your ass off to look the best for the cottage and at your best so that you can be the most healthiest and active at the cottage. And I go hard, hard, hard for 2 3 months. Then the cottage arrives, I kill it, I feel good, and I'm back at the cottage is over and I'm back at the gym. Then I very quickly start thinking about what my next goal is. Or like, oh, there's a soccer league coming up and I want to be at my most active. Oh, I got this trip coming up. Oh, I'm going to go speak at this event and I just want to look my best. I want to fit into this suit. So I'm always lining up short-term wins in this long-term marathon. And that allows me to have multiple hits of motivation that keeps me going at my best. Do you have that as well with the things that you do? Because you do a lot. And I need to know, like, you kind of described your why at the very beginning, but sometimes that why gets lost. And I'm curious in how you bring that back and resurface it. Like, some people have vision boards, right? They have it right up in their face on a wall so they could see what their why is every morning and it reminds them. What do you do to give yourself the fuel to get through that long journey of life that takes a long period to get there? How do you win the long game?
I think the way you described is one of the best ways, and it's actually how one of our neurotransmitters called dopamine works. Dopamine, people think, is the pleasure molecule, but actually it's a molecule of motivation. The best way to keep getting those hits is to set up short-term goals for one that lines up to a long-term goal. Actually, I think Tony Hawk even mentions it, and how he did. I don't even remember what skateboard trick it was, but he worked his way up, and he broke that long-term goal into shorter-term goals. So each time he hit the shorter-term goals, he would get that dopamine hit. He would get that kind of motivation, that pleasure to keep going for the next one. And ultimately, it led him down to that road until he eventually got to the final one. So that is one of the best ways to go about it, and actually it makes sense neuroscientifically. So if you can do that, take a long-term goal and break it down to smaller chunks into shorter-term goals that get you there, it's probably the best way. For me, when it comes to fitness, I actually don't do that. I don't have these short-term goals. I I think for me, it's more that I recognize my why a lot because of the fact that there's chronic pain, but because I've been doing it for so long, it's just become part of me and part of my identity. So it's not as deliberate. It's almost subconscious. And I think over time, depending on how strong your why is and the habits that you form, will just become subconscious at some point. And maybe they won't. And sometimes you have to adjust for that. So for instance, I know that, working out 2 times a day for, an hour and a half, 5 times a week, like minimum, I know that's not sustainable for my future, but maybe it could be if I place that focus there. So why not build a discipline for it? And why not build that foundation? And I think that is my motivation for that long-term goal. But to be honest, with fitness, there's not a long-term goal in sight besides becoming more the person I want to become. And that has always been at my very core what I'm drawn to, right? That's why I was drawn to psychology. That's probably why I was drawn to medicine, why I was drawn to the military, law enforcement at one point as well, is to have those exposures that would reveal who I am and how I can help the world around me by becoming more of myself and becoming the best version of myself, because in all those fields it deals with either like serving the community, protecting them, or healing people. So all of those are in line with my core values. For other long-term goals, for instance, like like studying for the exam I took, the sport exam, yeah, the short-term goals were there. I had a goal of, this is what I'm going to do every day, and if I reach it, great. And most of the time, if you set the bar low enough that you don't make yourself a slave, you usually surpass it. But if you set the bar too high, and you feel like you're forcing yourself to do it and you become a slave to who you are, then that's usually not going to work out. So having a daily goal, then a weekly goal does help in those circumstances. So I think it is highly subjective to my experience with fitness in general, and with trying out these new activities as well. It's all about this long-term abstract goal, which I will never know if I reach, and most likely I recognize that I'll never reach it. So that's different. But for actual practical applications, I agree. Short-term goals that line up to a longer-term goal is the best way for you to follow through, but it's also the best way to be happy as well because it feels good achieving some of these goals.
Yes, yes. I also love the fact that there are so many things in life that we hear the phrase pursuit of happiness. I kind of like the pursuit of success in this equation because it's the fact that there really isn't an end to that tunnel. But it's also the fact that that's actually exciting, knowing that you could keep getting better without having a goal in mind, right? It could be physical performance, it could be financial stance, it could be your communication level, being a better storyteller over and over without really knowing what that end is, right? Like when do you stop? Why not never? Why not keep getting better, even if it's 1% better at a time? And that to me is such a big piece of the puzzle is knowing that at the end of the day, if that goal is getting better, which we finally exposed in our social media, the theme of our season 1 of the Modern Mindset podcast, which is we can do better. The idea of what better is just being a better version of who you are today, right? It didn't say being the best. Best at what? Because when you're doing best, it means you're measuring yourself with comparison of are you beating every human being in this planet? Are you the one person that can do the one thing that no one else can? But why not just get better? And I think like that feeling of knowing that every single day you could be even better than who you are today and even better than the one you were yesterday. And you can do that for the rest of your life in different areas is one of the best motivators I've ever seen or heard of that also keeps me going every day. So that tunnel that never ends, but it allows you to have multiple levels of improving and seeing the benefits of that every step of the way is a great thing. We talk a lot about instant gratification versus delayed gratification, and instant gratification gets a bad rap because of the fact that it's connected with the fact that instant gratification means that the late gratification disappears. But there are many things in your life where instant gratification doesn't have a repercussion where you lose out in the long run, right? Like, and these short-term wins is a good example of that. Is like you could get that instant gratification in a different way and then jump back on track and use that to fuel you for your next instant gratification and eventually get to that end goal. And that part I feel like very rarely gets talked about is the fact that you could still enjoy the benefits of where you are and who you are without you having to sacrifice and throw everything away. And as a matter of fact, I encourage it, which is the emphasis on stop and smell the roses, because when you start tasting and smelling how good the world got as a result of these efforts, you're more likely to do it. And you're more likely to realize that there's a lack of when you take your foot off the gas. You start realizing that you're not performing as well, or you're not as happy, and life doesn't feel as exciting. And then you have all these other levels to help you gauge. So I'm not against instant gratification. I'm against instant gratification that comes as a result of losing the why that you were going to go for. And that's the one that I think needs sometimes to be addressed and very much drawn out. And you also brought up that emphasis on like finding that level of difficulty and even setting yourself up for easy wins. And it actually brought my head towards a very well recognized law out there called Yerkes-Dodson law. And I believe I talked about this in previous Clubhouse sessions we got, but I wanted to pull it up one more time because this is one thing that video game developers and companies understand better than most people. And as any of you that are video game fans will really appreciate this if you think about your favorite games. So think about either your favorite video game or think about your favorite game app that you're obsessed with that you seem to keep going back to. Mine, shout out to Pokemon Go. I've desperately been playing that game for a very long period of time. But one thing that game developers spend a lot of money, time, and effort is doing the R&D to determine the perfect level of difficulty to keep you into the game and keep you addicted to it. And this is very well highlighted by the Yerkes-Dodson law, which is the comparison on when things are too easy, when things are too hard, and how much it affects your performance level. And the truth is that your peak is not at the easy or the hard level. It's right in the middle because essentially this chart is drawn out like a bell curve. It's at the very center that you're at your peak performance because when you make a game or anything too easy, you start getting bored. When it's too easy and there's no competition, it gets too boring and redundant, and you're very likely to not give your utmost performance, and you may even quit depending on what the task is. When it gets too hard, it is way too stressful. It's not good for you mentally or physically, and all of a sudden you decide you don't like doing this because it's way too hard and it's not worth it. When you find the balance, like many of these video game companies have found, of making it a little bit challenging but also easy enough so you get some wins. A lot of these games that you play, usually that first like 3 to 5 levels is so easy, right? You're powering up, leveling up, but slowly it gets gradually harder. And then you kind of find your peak of like, this is the perfect level where I'm not good enough yet, but I know I can eventually beat it. That's where they try to get you. And if you think about that in your life, is there's many possibilities to utilize Yerkes-Dodson law into giving yourself the momentum of finding things that are easier to do, but not too easy. Finding things that are difficult to do, but not too difficult. Therefore, finding your utmost performance. And this can come back to the fitness one, but it can very much also tie in with the career path that you choose, the initiative that you launch, the project that you work on. You can find that feeling of something that gives you the right level of stimulation that allows you to be at your highest performance. When you think about that, Camille, that chart, what comes to mind? What is it that you do that illustrates, like if I give you the Yerkes-Dodson law, you'd put a dot right in the middle, and how were you able to discover that?
Trial and error most of the time. And it's funny that you mentioned what I thought about it because that instantly made me think of, I'm not sure. I think it's a pretty similar experience a lot of people have. When they start to procrastinate and they really want to start the activity that they need to do or that they think they need to do, I find personally, I start doing productive things in other fields. I start cleaning my room. I start like trimming my beard. I do everything I can that is sort of productive, but not productive to the goal I want at that time, right? And that's something to be mindful of. And maybe that's to build my momentum up to initiate that kind of triumph circuit, so that I could begin this next activity that I've been trying to avoid. And for me, finding that perfect point is difficult. There's a lot of times where I have certain goals. For instance, it could be learning a song, and it's just overwhelming. So if the difficulty is too high, then aim lower. And I mean by aiming lower is break it down. Instead of playing the whole song, learn 3 seconds of it, right? That is to me, the best way to break it down. And then eventually, increase it incrementally. And then just finding that like difficulty to boring slider, you just have to keep on like progressing and using trial and error. I think that's the main thing. And where I see that play out in my life is especially with guitar playing. Also with studying, there are certain concepts that I wasn't trained well in, and I really had to teach myself. And how I taught myself is, you know, you can dry read, so you can just read from a textbook. Sometimes even that in itself is difficult just because you're losing concentration. So luckily we live in an age where we have so many resources available. I listen to a YouTube video and I watch it. So I can listen to it, I can watch and listen, and I could find someone that explains it to me in a way that makes me interested in that. So you can modify your approach if you have a very specific target in mind. You can always modify your approach to have that difficulty lower or higher sometimes. So for me, it's about trial and error. And when you feel like it's too easy and boring, I think you re-examine what you're doing. And you do that with asking yourself, is this worth doing? Because if it's boring, then why am I doing it? And then what you find is it's boring because I'm not doing it well enough, or that this doesn't serve me well anyway. And either way, you win in that regard because you can become more proficient by looking at the micro aspects or details and trying to understand whatever it is you're trying to do on a deeper level.
Man, I feel like we started this podcast at the best possible time in my life because one of the things that I've been doing heavily on during the quarantine time is doing a 12-month comparison of what my life looked like at the beginning of lockdown versus the end of lockdown. And it ties in very much with the understanding of really assessing and analyzing what's been difficult and what's been well in my life. And I almost want to end here with just the emphasis on really taking a hard look about where you are in your life and making that decision that you can change things very, very quickly. There's a line by, I think, Tony Robbins that I've heard maybe 4 or 5 entrepreneurs repeat it over the last 3 months, where it's very cliche. And I know I'm going to sound cliche when I say this because I don't think I'm the only one that hears this, which is I believe Tony Robbins said that we overestimate how much we think we can do in a year, and we underestimate how much we can do in 10. And I really believe that so wholeheartedly. And the fact that I heard it about 4 or 5 times makes me almost feel like it's a sign, like someone is trying to tell me to get that damn thing done. And I think it's worth well recognizing that is 12 months ago, on my birthday on March 5th, 2020, I sat down and I was sitting down with our group of friends celebrating my birthday. And as much as it should have been fun, man, like I was really sad that day. And I told my friends that like, man, like there's things in my life that are just not working out from a relationship standpoint, from a fitness standpoint, and all these other things, because I get very reflective on my birthday. And unfortunately, my mind drifted to a very dark place. And as much as that should have been a great celebration, it really wasn't. And then March 2021, when I look back, I remember I celebrated it with my girlfriend, and I remember like having a conversation, being reflective. And the best feeling in the world is not seeing darkness, but sunshine. And knowing that the 12 months of effort that I put in, I couldn't believe with how much I've been able to turn my life around. And those pillars that I talked about that I measure on this app called Toggle, it's beautiful to look at it and saying that I can see a very clear indicator that I've changed things that I do. I change where I put my attention, and I change the fact that I execute on it. And that resulted in me going from what used to be the most unhappiest person that I was to becoming at the peak happiest that I am. There is no doubt, Camille, every fiber in my body knows that if I'm in an unhappy place, and if listeners that you're listening, if you're in an unhappy place with any of those pillars in your life, just know that there is a solution. There is an opportunity for you to move. Like you can physically move. You can change your postal code and move somewhere else, or you can mentally move and you can move through your habits. You can, as Camille identified on many parts of this podcast episode, your identity. You can change your identity and become someone that makes you happy, and then allow your actions to align with that. And when you really are able to get to that root of modifying your identity to have the habits, it's not as much about relying on, it's not about relying on motivation. It's relying on the fact that this identity is basically your survival. This is who you want it to be to get out of an unhappy place. And the fact that it's in your control, you have the capability to do that, is one of the most beautiful gifts that this world can give you, is that it's up to you to decide how to change that. I had a tough conversation with my girlfriend the other day where she was saying, she was complaining about something that didn't work out in her favor. And she said, it's okay, life's unfair. And I said, that is the beautiful thing about life. It's that it's unfair. It means you don't have to be okay with who you are today. You don't have, it's not a level playing field where everyone has to be miserable when they're miserable. You can change that. You can actually change that level of fairness and have it work out in your favor. And I think when you realize that life is unfair, it's not a curse. It's a beautiful gift, is that there are opportunities to rise above the level that you're in. There are opportunities to be better than who you are today. And you can do that on any given day by making that decision and acting on it. And I hope, Camille, in the last hour 45 that we put into this episode, is going to really allow someone to listen to this and find ideas that they could implement. I'd love to give you the parting words as just before you do that, I just want to thank our listeners for listening. And I do want to encourage, I want to make this a habit because I get so into our content that I don't talk about the basic necessities of our podcast show, which is first and foremost, if you're listening to it on an audio platform, which Camille and I did a very hard job in making sure we're available on all streaming platforms, iTunes, Amazon Music, Spotify. We got you. If you're listening to it on any of these streaming platforms, all we ask is that you hit that subscribe and follow button and leave us a review if you can on that platform. Your feedback is our oxygen. Your star rating is what keeps us going. If you take a moment to just let us know what you think, it'd be great. And for those of you that love seeing our Sunday morning faces of what we look like after a weekend of activities and are watching us on video, I encourage you to do the same. Hit the like button so that the algorithm allows more people to learn about our show. Hit the subscribe button so that you're the first person to get notified. And please do use that comment section to let us know if you gained any value or if you have thoughts around the topics that we're discussing, because we want to keep growing this community into something significant. Camille, with that being said, we know that execution is one of the, if not the largest pieces of being able to change your life and becoming someone that is much better, more significant than the one that you are today. Can you talk a little bit about your plea of what you hope? You're doing paddleboarding today for the first time, which I'm going to let you go very shortly so you can enjoy the sun a little bit. But if someone was to use paddleboard and replace that with whatever they want to achieve in their life, you're doing it for the first time. How do you become the master of paddleboarding? How do you make that a big part of your life, and how do you make that a routine? Can you please share that down as we wrap up today's episode?
Sure. Thank you very much. I would start with just doing the research to see what harms are possible. So once you understand that there is some harm to what you're doing, if there is at all, well, there naturally has to be, understand how to reduce it. Then, by doing so, you can start to take action. Once you start taking action, you can discover if this is a habit that you want to adopt, and you do that by asking yourself why and who you want to become. Is this in line with my identity? Is this in line with my core values? And from there, exposure. So, like you mentioned before, progressive quality through quantity. It's just repeat exposures over and over again. Talk to people that are experts. Research more when you get there. Like, find out what it is and actually be present in the moment to recognize that you're going to make mistakes, and that's good because that gives you information on how to improve. From there, you can evolve by doing these micro tasks. Maybe it's about foot placement. Maybe it's about how you hold a paddle, right? It can be so many different things, and that only comes through experience. That information comes through experience, and you can research how to fix that. So it's about, again, just taking the first step. And then from there, you can make short-term goals. Okay, so this time I'm going to focus on doing this for half an hour. Or I'm going to focus on doing a certain technique and trying to actually concentrate on this particular technique for so long. And you build up these short-term goals for eventually the long-term one down the road. So having a clear outline on how you want to do the activity you want to do. And again, like we mentioned in episode 1, the how is a very important question to ask. And the why is just the motivationally based question on why it's important to you, and that if it's in line with your core values, if it's worth doing. And from there, just evolve and grow at a pace that is sustainable to you. And it's about the long game, like you mentioned several times. It is so important to recognize that the fun and the beauty of doing the activity, that fades over time. The motivation will fade. It's an emotion, after all. You don't expect emotions to last forever, right? That's why people get addicted to drugs, because that's a reliable sense of an emotion. All you have to do is up the dose. Well, for this, you're going to have to recognize that you're going to have to be diligent with that, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that you're on the wrong path. It's just a natural part of the process. And to get those positive emotions back, the best way is, again, the short-term goals to build up to the long-term. And I think that's a good starting place for better execution towards who you want to become and what you want to do.
Camille, you're the freaking man. Thank you so much for coming in and jamming with me. And I really enjoyed this one specifically for the fact that I think we approach action very differently, but both produce results, which is a really big testament to the fact that there isn't only one way to do it. There's multiple ways. And I'm really happy that people get to hear from different perspectives because they can almost pick and choose what works best for them. And I think that's the big part of Better Conversations that we started with. Thank you so much for jamming with me yet again. We're going to be back next Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern time, and we're going to hit off episode 4. We'll surprise you with what the topic is at that time, but thus far, I've been incredibly happy. And from ourselves to you, we hope that you continue to get better, and we'll see you all next week. Take care, everyone.